we're back with another edition of Leadership Live. Thanks for joining us. My name's Steve Lois, and I'll be your host. You know, we bring on guests that have various different expertise in leadership. And leadership, sometimes it's HR, sometimes it's running a business, sometimes it's a combination of both. And today we've got a guest that actually has experience on both sides of the table. But today we want to have a bit of a different conversation for all my CEO friends out there, as well as for all my CHRO or heads of HR friends that are out there as well. And I know both of you are actually watching this. Jason Leoy is with me again. Jason, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
This is, I think, our third time together.
Yes, it is.
Give or take.
Yep.
For those of you that are watching for the first time, Jason Leoy is the Chief HR Officer for Dawn Foods here in Michigan. You've been there 5 or 6 years now?
In that role, and I've been at Dawn for 10, yeah.
For 10 years.
Yep.
And I asked Jason specifically to come out and have this particular conversation. We've had other chats around leadership in general, because you've got not just leadership on the HR side, but on the operations side in your previous roles with GE and other places as well.
Right.
But we've got an interesting one today, and it's a topic that we've chatted quite a bit about. It's a topic that I see a lot online about, but I wanted to go right to the source on this one.
Okay.
And you're my source. So here's kind of the question. What does a CEO really want and really need from their CHRO or head of HR? So let's think about that again. What does a CEO really want and really need from their CHRO, from their head of HR?
Yeah.
And I've got my perspective on it as a CEO. You've got your perspective. No, you're very close with your CEO. Yep. And have gone back and forth on that, and as well as from sitting in that role for so long. So I want to get your thoughts first. What does a CEO want from you?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, what my CEO wants from me is not just to be a CHRO.
What do you mean by that?
She wants me to be a business leader, right? She wants me to think like a business leader, not just like an HR person, and I think that...
Define that.
Yeah, I think she wants me to understand the business, the P&L, the inflows, outflows of how our business operates, how we make money, all the different elements that go into it from a people perspective, right? And that's where the HR element comes in.
Sure.
And then also be, her confidant, the person that she goes to work through various issues, and then also someone that she knows is going to handle or to work with the leadership team and all the people around her. When you think about the board of directors and you think about her leadership team, kind of like a big old circle, like to ensure that I understand the different elements of what's going on from a dynamics perspective in the organization. And that's what she's expecting out of me. And then all the while, making sure the HR function operates,
sure.
Right? So,
do you think most CEOs want the same thing that she wants?
Do they want the same thing?
Yeah, I didn't say do they have it. Let's start with,
yes.
Do you think, just based on your own experience, do you think most CEOs want what she wants?
I think they want it, but they don't know that they want it. Some don't even know that they want it. I think that's the best way to describe it.
Okay.
Because I think that, like, a CEO, and the beauty of CEOs is that they are the ultimate executive in the business. They're running the business, and by virtue of that position, they know, or they should know, all the different elements of the business: finance, sales, marketing, operations.
To a certain extent.
They have to know enough to be dangerous in all those different aspects, right?
Smell BS when BS is happening.
Right.
That's as far as they need to know in most of those functions.
And they might have like different lines of expertise in some of the various, but they know a lot about the business in the different lines, in the different functions within the business. And sometimes that clouds their judgment in saying, well, it's the people thing. I got the people, right? I just need the chief HR officer or my head of HR just to do what I say, right? And I've seen that, and I've heard that before. Not necessarily, I haven't heard that from my CEO. I've benefited from leaders that have not thought that way throughout my career. Not one of them has thought that way. And I'll go back to my first leader at some point in this conversation, but all my leaders throughout my entire career have never wanted that from me. I have heard peers of mine suffer from that, where they've had a leader, a CEO, a VP of whatever function, or a plant manager, where you just do what I ask you to do and just run the people function, and I don't need you to do anything else.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's where, when you get CEOs, and they probably do that with all their different functions. Like, I just need you to run finance. I just need you to run IT. I just need you to run this, that, or the other thing. When you get so siloed, it becomes very dangerous, because then you have people that don't understand how things are working against each other or with each other. It's a better way of saying it.
Yeah, I don't know that all CEOs, even the CEOs that do have them siloed like that, I don't think they all do it on purpose because
Right.
they want it siloed. I think some of them, and this is my conversations with a lot of them from various sizes, whether it's a $20 million company or whether it's a $750 billion company. I think some of them are just used to that's all they get.
Right.
Where the HR leader just knows HR, where the
Right.
finance leader wants just finance and doesn't want to cross over and doesn't look at anything broader than that, which I think is hurting the HR person and hurting that finance person.
I agree. And I think that's where sometimes they need, okay, well, how do I ask more of
Yeah.
that function? Or do I even know that I need to ask? Some of them don't even know they need to ask more of.
Well, I think that's where part of the
Right.
issue comes into play is I think there's a lot of probably CEOs and presidents that don't know what more to expect from a CHRO.
Right.
And is this a fair statement? CHR, heads of HR, whatever you want to call them, sometimes don't know what additional they should know,
Exactly.
if
No,
that makes sense.
I agree with that, because I think that sometimes, the HR function sometimes gets a bad rap.
Sometimes?
A lot of times gets a bad rap.
Unfortunately, I would
Yeah.
think, and I love HR.
Right.
I've been in it a long time. You've been in it a long time. Unfortunately, I think too often it gets a bad
Right.
rap.
And I think if you look at the way we're trained, right? If you look at the way a classical HR person is trained, and I'm not pointing out, organizations or whatever, but we're very typically trained in a very functional way of operating, right?
For example?
For example, if I go to get a certification in some HR thing, I'm typically taught the comp and benefits and all the different elements of HR that I'm required to get that certification, right? And I've gotten those certifications before, and it taught me very narrowly the different aspects of HR I need to get that certification. Whereas I was actually better suited or better trained in other elements of the business to make myself a better HR person in total. Meaning, I got the opportunity to run lean events at one of my companies. When I say lean events, I'm not talking about a lean event for HR.
Sure. You're talking about
I'm
cross.
talking about a lean event in a machining area in a plant.
Yeah.
Right? Where I got to understand, product availability, delivery, inventory, all that stuff. I got to understand all different aspects of what went on in that machining center to then flow into the assembly line, because they used to assemble pieces of a broader machine that you would feed into an assembly line. So I had to learn the business. There's nothing HR in that project.
Yeah.
Right? I was still doing the plant HR manager job, but I was also leading that event. And
So by default, you had to learn the business. You didn't have a choice.
No, you had to learn the business. But that was the expectation of that company. Like, HR people, finance people, environmental health and safety people, anybody that was in the office, they were expected to lead events. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just HR. It was all. So anybody on the team beyond the manufacturing manager could still run pieces of that plant, right? And that to me showed, one, the organization had the courage to do that, because it takes courage to say, okay, I'm going to open different aspects of our business up to people that may not be fully trained on how to run particular areas, but train them how to do it, and then what they're gonna wind up with afterwards is highly trained leaders, right? Happen to do HR or happen to do finance.
They specialize in a function,
Right.
but they know business in general.
They know business in general.
Yeah.
And that to me is those experiences train me much better than any certification I ever got. Not that I'm I'm not denouncing my certifications.
Yeah, I get it.
But it's like, when you learn the business, you are much better suited for a leadership role down the line than just getting a certification in something, right? And I go back to my first manager. My first manager was a plant manager. He was a VP of manufacturing. He had been a plant technician. He'd have every job in between, but then he was, working the rest of his career out in the last 5 years of his career fixing broken plants. And he had a very tough reputation. He was a very difficult manager. Loved him to death, and he is actually a mentor of mine for 10 years until he passed away. But he sat me down. I was right out of graduate school, $40,000 in debt. He sat me down and said, "Listen, Jason, you can take all that HR crap you learned in school and throw it out the freaking window." He used other words.
He used a different F word.
Yeah, but you can throw it out the freaking window. And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" I'm like, "I just wasted all this money?" He goes, No. He goes, "You have to do 4 things for me. Know the business, know the people, never let me get surprised. And by the way, you have to be able to run this plant." And I looked at him like, "What are you talking about? I'm not an engineer." He goes, "I don't care. My finance person, my AHS person, everybody on my team can run this plant. I got 6 weeks of vacation." He goes,
Somebody's got to be there to run
Somebody's
it.
got to be running it. So you got to do it. And I'm like, once you do all those things, then you can do your HR thing. So to answer your first question at the front end, if I take his advice but apply it at a more macro scale as his chief HR officer, that's exactly what my CEO expects out of me. She's never said it that way. I actually say that to my HR people. That's exactly what I say to every person that's on my team. Those are my expectations out of you. Now, not running the plant, because I'm not running a plant, but you have to do these, know the people, know the business, and never let me get surprised. Because if you have to do those 3 things, you have to know everything about the business.
So why do you think, since you've come up through the HR side, why do you think there's so many that are so siloed, that don't, either the company hasn't put them in a role where they've got to learn the business, know the people, know all those, or that's just the education that they've received? Like, why do you think this is happening? Because it's happening a lot.
Right.
Because it's pushback we receive. I hear a lot. I just give you an example. A couple months ago, I spoke at a conference west of the Mississippi, and it was a little bit of this conversation of what does the leadership need from HR, and it was, here's some of the things you need to know about how a business runs, right? Return on investment, cash flow, and I had these HR leaders looking at me like, why the hell do I need to know this? And I actually got that question afterwards from a number of them, because these are the 4 things that make up every business, no matter what business you're in, anywhere in the world. You got to know these 4 things. And I was flabbergasted that they didn't even know some of these terminology and what it actually meant. Where is that coming from? I get it's happening. You were just explaining it, but where is that coming from?
I think honestly, it's comfort. I think it's a comfort crisis in our function and within functions in general, whether it be HR, finance, whatever.
Any discipline.
You're comfortable where you know you have this knowledge, right? So where are people most generally the most comfortable? I am most comfortable where I have the most knowledge and I feel like I can contribute the most. I'm not comfortable in places that I don't have the knowledge or I don't have all the answers and I have to learn. That to me is more of the rarity. Like the people that are comfortable being uncomfortable are generally going to be the ones that are more successful. Because if you think about someone starting a business, right? Someone starting a business, and I have to imagine you didn't know everything about recruiting when you started.
Not at all. Right?
You were uncomfortable, but you know what? You probably did some research. You figured out, you know what? This is probably the right business to get into.
No, I was using recruiters and realized how
much money
crappy they were, and figured out there's a better way to do this, and then stumbled into. That's how I got into it.
Right. So you didn't know everything.
No.
Right. But you knew it was a business. You knew that you were spending money on it. And you knew that you could do it better, but you didn't know how you do it better.
Not at the time.
There's a ton of uncomfort there, but you're probably comfortable in being uncomfortable to get that business to be successful. Now, if I'm an HR person, I've been rewarded, I've been recognized, I've been trained, I've been certified, I've been educated in a certain discipline. I am very comfortable in that discipline. I'm a VP of HR, I'm making $200,000 a year, whatever, and I'm really happy and I'm comfortable and I'm rewarded. Why would I seek to make myself uncomfortable trying to learn or put myself in scenarios where I don't know and I might look like a fool? And no one's going to think you're a fool if you're trying to learn the business.
Right.
Nobody is.
Right.
If I went to my boss today and said, I want to learn these different aspects of the business, she would say, go do it. And
But would it be shocking to a lot of CEOs? I think it would be. If the head of HR or anybody on the team came to an exec and said, I want to go learn the business because of the kind of the general perspective that needs to change within HR, I think most CEOs would be shocked.
I think they'd be shocked, but I think they would also, I think most CEOs they would welcome that. Because
Agreed with that.
Because any CEO or any leader that's worth their salt is okay with their people being learning humans, right? With I want to continue to learn, I want to continue to be better. If what I get out of that is a better HR person, a better finance person, a better whatever person, all the better.
Yeah, there's no downside. There's no downside to it. So you bring up a good point though. If they don't know the business, that's why they're uncomfortable at some point in their HR career of trying to learn the business. Why aren't we doing a better job of teaching them the business early on? Even in college, for example.
Yeah.
Why are we missing the boat there?
Again, I think what it goes to is what's rewarded.
Okay.
Right? What are educators rewarded for? They're rewarded for studying, researching, teaching this functional discipline.
Yeah.
Right? They're not rewarded for. Now, the best programs that are out there or the best education you can get out there are the ones that incorporate the different elements that you need to know. I benefited from some very, very learned people along the way that were not purists in their function, meaning they had been business leaders, but they happened to go back to school, get a PhD, and come back and teach. Like one of my favorite professors out there he was the head of the electrical workers union in the Northeast.
Wow.
And retired, got his PhD, and taught labor relations at our school. And he would open up saying, I'm teaching you how to deal with people like me. Right? But you already got me. You got me, because now I know that you're not just a teacher, you're not just a professor, you're someone else that's actually been around the block, right? And I've also had other teachers or professors that have had similar experiences. They're not just pure, academics. They were practitioners too.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know one of the things I hear from CEOs a lot, and we've had these conversations and roundtables and all of that is my head. Sometimes it's the head of HR, sometimes it's the staff. Is they view me, the CEO, as an ATM machine, as opposed to let's make the business case for the things that we do. You and I've had this conversation a number of times about looking at things from the business side of stuff, and that's something that's often lacking from a CHRO. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I'll put it into good examples. Like if I come up with a leadership program, let's just use a very generic word, right? A leadership program, and I go to my CEO. Now this is a non-business oriented CHRO.
Okay.
Right? I go to you and I say, hey, we need to do a leadership program because it's good for our leaders and we need to build capability and take our leadership to the next level.
I'm going to say, how much is it going to cost me?
It's going to cost $200,000.
That's a lot of money.
Well, it's what we need to do.
See the interaction here?
Yeah, it's not right.
So for anybody who's watching this, there's a stalemate on the ATM machine at this particular point.
And typically that's what happens.
Yeah.
Now, frame it up a different way. We've just gone through our succession planning process. We know we've got succession gaps. We know we've actually placed people in very senior roles, like VP roles or C-suite roles, and used outside firms, right? We've had to go on the outside. So you're spending, let's say you're spending $300,000-$400,000 in search firm fees, which you can do pretty easily.
Yeah, oh yeah.
You get a couple big VP roles,
$100,000 a pop right there.
A C-suite role here or there. I mean, you're talking big bucks real fast.
Yeah.
So let's say, for sake of an argument, I said, let's say we just spent $500,000 on placing like 7 or 8 VPs and maybe a C-suite leader, right? Probably a little bit less than that for $500,000. But anyway, let's say we just spent $500,000, and I want to put together a leadership development program for the people that have been identified as ready now or ready in the very short-term successors for those exact roles that we just filled. And that, that leadership program costs $200,000, right? And I give the same pitch, and I say, hey, we need to put together this leadership development program, and I've identified the exact audience that we need to target for this leadership program. It's the 10 to 12 ready now or ready in very short order successors for other VP roles and other C-suite roles. And we need to put this leadership program together because we identified gaps in their capability that this program fits, so that we can have those people ready to take those jobs when they become open, so that we can avoid paying the $500,000 we just spent on all those roles being filled from the outside. And also, by the way, you're not adding in all the other costs associated with onboarding people that are not going to be successful, because someone hired from the outside is probably not going to be successful. And so let's say, we've spent over $500,000 on that, and I'm going to put this leadership program together for $200,000, and those people will be ready in 1 year.
Now you've made a business case for it. Done. You're going to save me $300,000 in essence is what you're going to do. Yeah.
And probably more than that, right? Because if you had to take all those other other costs associated. But that's just one very easy example. I mean, recruiting is another example. Recruiting is like, if you can bring recruiting in-house for most of your jobs and not using external agencies and a whole bunch of other stuff, you can generally make a business case for that most of the time. And that's a fairly easy business case to make. And or increasing wages on your direct labor force, right? And that was a really key one not too long ago in COVID. I've talked to many people that were in the same boat where they couldn't fill roles, right? They couldn't fill jobs. And I talked to 2 HR leaders, and I also experienced it myself, where they were having a very tough time filling frontline roles post-COVID. And therefore they were saying no to business, right? Because they couldn't staff their
Turning
lives.
away revenue because you didn't have the staff to actually support the revenue.
Yeah, turning away millions of dollars of revenue because you didn't have the staff to support going out and getting that sale, because you had to tell your salespeople to say no.
Yeah.
Which you never want to do. So you have HR leader A saying, we need to increase wages because we can't hire staff.
It's going to cost me more money.
Right. Plant managers going to say, cost me way too much money. I can't do it. I'm being held to an OPEX standard. I can't do it.
Yeah.
HR leader B says, look, we can't staff the lines. We are way out of market in our wages in this area. We need to increase our wages by 15 to 20%. It's going to cost us, let's say, $100,000. But you know what? That $100,000 in cost, if we can staff our lines and keep our lines running, we will be able to get that $2 million, $3 million, $4 million in sales we just walked away from. It's going to pay back like that.
And then some.
Yeah, and then some. And that's the same business case that we made. And it was approved. And as a result, we were able to staff our lines, get that business, and take away business from the competition.
But you have to understand the business in order to make that case.
Right.
And that's one of the challenges.
Like, you have to even just understand that you're walking away from business.
Yeah.
Right.
But you have to know how the business works. You have to understand the impact of it and be able to present it in a way that makes financial business sense, not just people sense.
Right.
You got to have them both.
Right. Exactly.
That's a big deal. So taking all that into consideration, if you had your CEO sitting on one side and or a bunch of CEOs on one side and you had a bunch of heads of HR on the other side, how would you bring them together? What would you do? How would you facilitate that conversation so that the CEO could articulate what they want, or they don't know what they want and you got to get that out of them, and you had a bunch of heads of HR trying to figure out what the CEO really needs? Like, how would you bring them together, and how would you get them to have that conversation?
Yeah, so first off, it's interesting because I always start with the mindset of I want to hear what the business wants first. Like I'm going to ask that side first.
Sure.
Even if I'm the HR person, I'm not going to ask the HR people first.
Why?
Because they run the business.
Okay.
They are the chief executives of the business. This is a function, and they need to understand what these folks are looking for.
But if they don't know,
then I will give them scenarios like we just talked about.
Okay.
Right? I'll say, what if this scenario goes this direction? And let's play out the conversation. Which would you rather have? Would you rather have the ATM conversation, or would you have the, and you're probably gonna get a whole bunch of head nods over here, like, yeah, this is what I want too. And then you start flip-flopping the conversations. And then from my perspective, I would actually have the conversation with this group first. I would have someone like you have the conversation with the HR people over here, and then you bring them together and say, okay, what did I learn from that? Because I think that at the end of the day, sometimes this side of the room doesn't know what they don't know.
True.
And same thing on this side.
Yeah, agreed.
Right? And so when you start from that vantage point, it's about educating both sides. 'Cause I think both sides know that they need something.
They may not
or they're
know
missing
what it is.
They're missing something.
Yeah.
Which is why they're there to begin with. Right? And just by showing up, that's the first step. Right? First step is acknowledging a problem.
Yeah.
Right? Or acknowledging an opportunity, better said. Because I think that when you think about roles on a leadership team and how roles work together, and I mean, I'm biased, the CHRO, CEO, CHRO, CFO kind of relationship, it's this triad, of they all need to be kind of working simpatico, right? Because that's not to say that the other roles in the team aren't important. They are very important.
All of them.
They're all important. But if you have those three that don't work well together,
you got a problem.
It's a big problem.
Labor is one of your biggest costs, outside of capital expenses via plants and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, the CFO needs to understand that, and the CHRO needs to understand the financial implications, how the business runs, and everything. And the CEO is the CEO.
Yeah.
So there's no two ways around all of that.
Right, because generally, like if you're a business leader in the business reporting to the CEO, if you're running the business and you're making your numbers, I mean, there you go.
So if you're giving advice to a CEO today who might not even know that this is an issue, what advice would you give them today? What steps should they take right now?
Go grab your CHRO, and not physically, but go grab.
I get it.
Go grab your CHRO and say, here's what I need out of you, right? First, write it down. Write down what do you, given everything we just talked about, given that scenario of like that conversation that my manager had with me, what is it that you actually expect out of your CHRO? Write it down. Like if you had these things today, how would that make your life easier, better, more effective from a business perspective? Write them down, go grab your CHRO and start having that conversation and say, let's figure out how we can develop this together. And I'm not going to pretend that I know everything. If I'm the CEO, I'm not going to pretend I know everything, and nor should you. So let's figure out how we're going to do this together and what we need to do to get this relationship more in a symbiotic relationship, right? Where I know, and I can be confident that you know what I know, and you also know stuff that I need to know.
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
And it's kind of like it's the chief of staff kind of concept. Like if you think about the president, the chief of staff's got to be that person that can be their confidant, that can whisper in their ear, that can tell them, what to look out for, and be their person that they rely on to call them out, right? Or to be that person to say, this is how you're gonna be more effective today, or here's the messaging that you need to position.
Now flip that. Okay, CEO, go talk to your CHRO, but write down what you think you need ahead of time to determine if the CHRO can provide that, and stop thinking about the HR function in terms of a silo.
Correct.
Think about it just as important, because it is, and think about it more broadly, how it can impact the broader business, especially given those examples that you've provided. Now flip it. You've got a group of CHROs in the audience. What would be the direction you would give them?
Yeah, I would, and I've given that the direction.
I know you've done it a number of times.
get out of your own way. Get out of your own way, meaning don't rely on the very typical things that HR typically relies on, engagement, health and welfare, all that kind of stuff. That's all important, but get beyond that conversation. Get into the conversation around what the business needs to move forward. Understand what the business needs to get forward. Understand an aspect of the business. Put yourself in a position where, I think you alluded to this earlier, put yourself in a position where you're going to make your business leader, your chief marketing officer, somebody uncomfortable with saying, hey, I want to attend or I want to go on this customer visit. Their eyes will pop out of their head.
For sure.
Go do that, as opposed to going and reading another book or being on another webinar that's around how do we increase effectiveness or engagement in our organization. Get out there, get into the business, get out with your business leaders and make them uncomfortable in a good way. Like, oh man, I didn't know that you wanted to know this.
And cascade that throughout the entire HR organization. Just
Right.
think of what that would do to the rest of the organization.
Right. I mean, for me, like the way I start off, I've started this thing where I think it's been over a year now, where I have challenged my HR team, not just my staff, the entire HR organization globally, to understand the numbers. And I'll warn them all ahead of time. I'll say I'm going to ask questions about what our OI targets are, what our cash flow targets are, how are we doing against that, what's the target next year, what's the performance this year. Every town hall, I'm going to start off with those things versus all the HR stuff.
Yeah.
And my team stepped up to the challenge, because I started calling people out about, hey, Jimmy, what's the OI target for next year? Jimmy had the answer. And it was great, because I know that they have the answer to that question.
Yeah.
And in an engagement
survey, they get it. They know what it means.
And an engagement survey, what was fabulous is that, I'm not going to articulate the other function that had the answer to this question, but the HR function, when asked this question, I understand how my role affects or is part of the business, something to that effect. The answer to that, from a positivity perspective on a 100 percentage point scale, was like 70 to 80% for the HR team globally.
Yeah.
So they understood how their role applies to the business. When another function, which you would have expected would have been pretty high,
didn't know.
They were in the 60%. and that leader was like, well, how does the HR team understand their role, how it affects the business more than my function does?
Yeah.
Which, that makes no sense. I go, well, I talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
And I use examples, just like we talked about. Like I'll use examples, and my staff will use examples when they talk about the different projects that we're on. We don't talk about projects for project's sake. Like
but impact.
It's all about
sake.
impact.
Yeah.
It's all about impact.
To the business,
right.
Not just to your little silo.
Right. And sometimes, I always want to be uncomfortable, when it comes to certain things. And sometimes when you're successful, which my team and the business has been very successful over the last 5 years. And sometimes success breeds comfort, right?
Sure.
It breeds, I'm going to develop this new program. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And so we start to see that. And it's like, okay, let's stop just doing that and really articulate, what does that project, what is that program, how's that going to affect certain aspects of the business? And if you stop with that filter first, you're going to do the right things for the business. You're not going to do the stuff that's just fluff, right? And we don't have a lot of fluff.
No, you don't. But the perspective is interesting. I think the examples you gave are probably, if you're watching this, are probably the most important takeaway, because it puts it into kind of real terms, right? So if you're a CEO watching this, or a CEO, and they don't really know what to expect, share those pieces at least with them.
Right.
And the same on the HR side. If you're a CHRO, or another CHRO, and it's like, what does this really mean of what our CEOs should expect from us? Those are perfect examples, like true, real examples. You shared those with me before of this is what it means of what a CEO and probably rest of the C-suite is expecting from you.
Yep.
And those powerful. So share those things because this dialogue needs to continue and more work needs to be done to bring CEOs and CHROs, the departments together. There's no doubt about it. And there's opportunities to be able to do that. But sharing your perspective is incredibly powerful. I understand the relationship you have with your CEO, and I think it's the relationship that most CHROs or heads of HR want with their CEO.
Yeah.
And it's the relationship every CEO wants with their CHRO.
Yeah, and the other aspect to it, I would say also, is that typically HR, legal sometimes falls in this too. We rely on compliance.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And sometimes, CEOs and other business leaders like, oh, I can't really address that because that's, if I screw around with HR, it's the compliance area, and
that goes back to the 60s.
Yeah, but
it was a compliance thing.
Let's get beyond that. And sometimes, I would say that society and other things like that, they don't help our function sometimes because we're looked at as the social police or whatever. And it's like, let's get beyond all that stuff because at the end of the day, what we do collectively as an organization, whatever it's acronymed up to be, has to drive revenue,
business.
Right?
Yep.
So let's get beyond, fearing certain aspects of what we do and just say, and that's sometimes why CEOs don't even lean into that stuff. Like, I
don't want to open that box.
I'm going to check off a bunch of boxes and just I'll make sure that happens. No, lean into it and say, here's what I expect, and here's what I'm demanding as a CEO. And then also from an HR perspective, don't rely on, the social trends or anything like that as being your job security. Because as we've seen, some things, they come and they go. They come and they go.
Yep.
And so you can't rely on that.
We've seen a lot of that in the last 5 years.
Yeah, the value add that you provide is the sustaining stuff that drives the business forward.
Think about that, HR. You drive revenue. Think about that.
That's a concept.
You drive revenue, and that's the perspective to take. And from a C-suite perspective, a CEO's perspective, think about HR not as a cost, but a strategic way to drive revenue and to take care of your customers. When those two things align, now you've got the relationship that you and your CEO happen to have.
It's golden.
Golden. Jason, thank you for taking the time
and
sharing your perspective. If you're a CEO, again, share this. Or if you know of a CEO that needs to understand how to better leverage, partner with the HR function, share it with them. And again, if you're on the HR side, make sure you're sharing this. It's a different perspective. It's probably making some of you uncomfortable, and the conversation was designed to make some of you uncomfortable, to think about your roles in a more of a business terminology as opposed to just the silo of HR. For all of you that are watching, thank you for joining us on another edition of Leadership Live. If you want to be on the show, please reach out to us and let us know. You can get us on social media. You get me directly on social media. Feel free to send me a direct message. You can always text me or call me, 734-837-8500. If there's a topic you want us to address, we've got a whole list of other individuals that'll be coming on the show that are open to talking about anything related to leadership. We've got a number of topics we'll be putting out there, but if there's something you want us to address, please send us in a message and we'll see if we can't put that in there. But again, thank you for joining us. We'll see you on the next episode of Leadership Live.